So is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. I'm presenting a case of a 60-year-old male from Agra, Uttar Pradesh, and farmer by an occupation, presented with complaints of difficulty in swallowing solid food for 3 months and vomiting following food. Sorry, sir? Vomiting following food intake for 3 months. Patient was relatively asymptomatic before 3 months. Then he had difficulty in swallowing solid food, for which he required liquids with solid to swallow. Grade 2 dysphagia was there. It was followed by uh, vomiting of the same after few minutes. Initially, he had no problem in swallowing semi-solid and liquids. Gradually, dysphagia increases to semi-solid foods too, and now he can tolerate only liquids. Grade 4 dysphagia he is having at present, sir. He has also lost around 10 kg of weight in last 3 months. He also had complaint of upper back pain and loss of appetite is there, sir. No history of altered bowel habit, jaundice, hematemesis, melena, cough, fever, abdominal pain, retrosternal burning, regurgitation, or any corrosive consumption is there. No history of any allergic rhinitis, food allergy, improvement of symptoms with postural changes is there. No history of hoarseness of voice and hiccups is there, sir. In past history, patient is having no history of any similar complaints in the past, no history of any comorbidity, sir, no history of any surgery in the past, and no history of any prolonged medication intake is there, sir. In personal history, patient is having mixed diet, tobacco chewing for 30 years, no history of smoking or alcohol consumption, decreased sleep due to back pain, and decreased food intake due to dysphagia is there, sir. No significant family history is there, sir. To summarize my case, 60-year-old male chronic tobacco chewer presented with complaint of progressive dysphagia for solid to semi-solid, able to tolerate liquid only since 3 months with significant weight loss of 10 kg, loss of appetite, vomiting followed by food intake and back pain with no significant past history.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. Go to the first slide. Yes.
Yes, sir.
So are we sure that this is vomiting or?
Sir, this is regurgitation of food, sir, after few minutes of oral intake, sir.
What is the difference between vomiting and regurgitation? Why do we use two different terms?
Sorry, sir?
We use two different terms to describe that. So what is the difference between vomiting and regurgitation in terms of the patient's symptoms? And what is the difference in the interpretation? So vomiting is forceful.
Yes, sir.
Whereas regurgitation is effortless.
Yes, sir.
So normally patients would describe vomiting. They would say vomiting या उल्टी हो जाती है. But you then have to ask the details of the event, and then you have to differentiate whether it is really vomiting or regurgitation, because patient will describe regurgitation also as vomiting. Regurgitation is effortless reflux or coming out of the food, which is usually first in the mouth and then the patient spits out, whereas vomitus is forceful, so everything comes out. And the difference in analysis is that esophageal obstruction will cause regurgitation, whereas gastric outlet or intestinal obstruction will cause vomiting.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Whenever you have a patient with dysphagia, you
Yes, sir.
have to go into the details of what the patient calls vomiting. Actually, it may be regurgitation. That's the difference between the two.
Yes, sir.
Next. So here, of course, you have a classical history, that short duration history of progressive dysphagia.
Yes, sir.
And you can you describe why you asked all these other symptoms and what is their importance? What is their significance?
So history of altered bowel habit to rule out any other bowel pathology.
For that, you said He has lost 10 kg weight.
Yes, sir.
What does it mean?
Yes, sir. He has lost around 10 kg of weight in last 3 months, sir. It is suggestive of it could be due to loss of appetite due to, sir, aversion to food, because regurgitation of food and dysphagia is there, sir. It could be due to that also, sir. Then patient is also having complaint of upper back pain, sir.
No, no.
It could be due to,
Weight
sir.
loss, weight loss in a patient who has dysphagia
Yes, sir.
could be because of decreased intake of food. Isn't it? A patient who is not able to swallow, he cannot
Yes.
take adequate diet. So in other organs, when there is a significant weight loss, 10 kg in 3 months.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Significant weight loss usually indicates malignancy, but in a patient who has dysphagia, does weight loss always indicate malignancy?
No, sir. It could be due to decreased oral intake also, sir.
So even a patient who has a benign obstruction in the esophagus, benign dysphagia can have weight loss. So what will make it suggest that this weight loss is due to malignancy? What else would be there?
Sir, short duration of dysphagia and progressive dysphagia, and loss of appetite is also there, sir.
Anorexia, but you did not say whether in the next line. So this loss of appetite should have come with your loss of weight, because they are related to each other. See, otherwise, just as I missed it, although it is mentioned on the slide, but I missed it. The same way the examiner may do that. So you should say he has loss of appetite and he has lost about 10 kg weight in 3 months. They should come together. The grouping of symptoms should be significant. They should be related to each other. Okay.
Yes. Sorry, sir. Yes.
Upper back pain mean?
He is also having complaint of upper back pain, sir.
What is your analysis?
So it could be that there is a compression or involvement of neurovascular bundle on prevertebral plexus, sir. A vertebral involvement is there, sir. It could be due to malignancy.
No. So
There
you
could
said
be
two
possible.
things: neurovascular bundle or prevertebral plexus. So will that cause upper back pain if the neurovascular, which neurovascular bundles are there? Usually it is intercostals. So do they get involved? Do the intercostal nerves get involved in CA esophagus?
No, sir.
What does back pain indicate in CA esophagus? Back pain indicates involvement of the posterior parietes of the chest.
Okay, sir.
So back pain is significant. Clinically, if a patient has back pain, it may signify locally advanced disease, which is involving the prevertebral tissues or even the vertebrae. Also, what else could cause back pain? In addition to direct local infiltration, it could be metastasis.
It could be metastasis, sir. Yes, sir.
Anywhere.
Yes.
So back pain is a very important clinical symptom in a patient with painless progressive dysphagia. So this pain is of swallowing. Okay. So you can have pain with swallowing, but that is odynophagia, which is usually seen in esophagitis or in corrosive injury, not in malignant dysphagia.
Yes, sir.
Is the site of obstruction of any importance where the food is getting stuck?
No, sir. Patient wasn't sure to tell me. He's saying that he's having difficulty in swallowing, and after swallowing anything, it comes out, sir. He wasn't.
So maybe you should mention, because some examiners may ask you, suppose the patient is able to localize the site of obstruction. What does it mean?
It means, sir, that the growth or the malignancy is at the site or below the site. Beyond that point is there, sir.
Beyond means proximal or distal?
Distal, sir. Distal to the
Yes.
site patient is telling, sir.
If the patient says that the food is getting stuck in the neck, it doesn't necessarily mean that the obstruction or the disease is at that. It could be anywhere there, or it could be anywhere below that, but it is unlikely to be above that.
Yes, sir.
Because
so just to supplement that, Vinay, I'd like to be the localization of dysphagia or a feeling of bolus obstruction may not necessarily correlate with the site of obstruction. You might have symptoms traced to the cricopharynx or the upper esophagus, even with the obstructions at the lower end. So I don't think we can rely a lot on that. Yes. But yes, seldom is it above, because the sites of localization of pain are generally in the hypopharynx, in the cricopharynx area, or in the retrosternal area. So generally lesions will be at or below that level in the esophagus.
Yeah. Okay. Other negative symptoms?
Sir, no history of any altered bowel habits, sir. No history of any jaundice, sir. Jaundice to rule out, sir, any liver involvement if advanced tumor is there, sir. Then no history of any hematoma.
What does jaundice indicate? You said?
So advanced malignancy, sir, liver metastasis.
So liver metastasis cause jaundice? Do liver metastasis usually cause jaundice? They don't.
No,
Liver jaundice is not the symptom of liver metastasis. Liver metastasis cause just general asthenia, anorexia, weight loss, which would be there even in a non-metastatic. So there are no symptoms characteristic of liver metastasis. Only exception would be if there is a large metastasis which is sitting very close to hilum, one of the main ducts or the common duct, then yes, it can. But by and large, liver metastasis do not cause jaundice. Okay. So why did you mention no history of altered bowel habit as the first negative history? Which is the more important negative history here? Why mention altered bowel habit as the first negative history? See, what I'm trying to tell you, even in the negative history, you should mention the important, the directly relevant ones first. So here, hematemesis in melena, yes, is important. Cough is important. Retrosternal burning is important. That should come first. Altered bowel habit doesn't have any direct relationship with the symptomatology that we are dealing with. Okay.
sorry.
Next line, you mentioned allergic rhinitis, food allergy. What is the relationship?
So sometimes patient are having esophageal motility disorders, like and it presents as rhinitis, early morning cough. So sir, to rule out that, sir, I have asked.
No, but why do you say no history of allergic rhinitis? How did the patient give you a history of allergic? Recurrent rhinitis or rhinosinusitis is fine.
Yes.
But why do you say allergic rhinitis? That is what my objection is. You are right. Patients who have recurrent aspiration or regurgitation, they can present as rhinitis, sinusitis, recurrent chest infection. That is all right. But why add the adjective allergic? And what do you mean by food allergy? Why do you talk of food allergy?
So if patient is having allergy to some food, he can also have dysphagia due to that, sir. So
Food allergy will cause dysphagia? I'm not sure.
It's not exactly food allergy. You know, you're talking of eosinophilic esophagitis, which can present with dysphagia and obstruction. It is not necessarily a food allergy that you can pinpoint to a food item, although exclusion diets, elemental diets have been proposed. But eosinophilic esophagitis is such a rare cause of dysphagia that in every common or garden case, to try and elicit a history which is generally non-specific would be very useful.
Okay, so what we are trying to tell you that even the negative points which you mentioned in history or examination, they should be ones which are directly related to the case or the diagnosis which you are going to make. Okay, go to the next slide.
No significant past
Everybody
history.
else, please mute yourself. Some microphones are on. Please mute yourself.
So there is no significant past history, sir. In personal history, patient
In which condition you will have a similar past history? What do you mean by that?
Sir, if there is a esophageal motility disorders are there, sir, there might be history in past, sir. Then in past history, sir, gastroesophageal reflux disease symptoms are there, sir. GERD could also present is past history, sir.
So that should have come here. That no history of, because GERD will not cause similar complaints. Similar complaints mean dysphagia.
Yes, sir.
GERD symptoms will be different. So
Dysphagia and progressive weight loss.
GERD should come here. That he doesn't have history suggestive of acid dyspepsia, including gastric pain, intestinal burning, all those things. So that should come here. When you present negative history, it should be clear to the examiner what is going on in your mind and why you are talking about this past history.
Okay, sir.
Okay, let's
I think, and you repeatedly been mentioning esophageal motility disorders. Now, that's not one diagnosis. What exactly do you have in mind? Are you talking of achalasia cardia? Also, then there are specific set of symptoms you have to elicit and exclude. Other motility disorders are not only uncommon, but they seldom present with progressive chest pain dysphagia.
Somebody's microphone is on. Everybody else, please mute yourself. Otherwise, I will have to name you. Please mute everybody. Sorry, Dr. Saraswat, I think you will have to repeat that again because there was some disturbance. Dr. Saraswat?
Esophageal motility disorders have repeatedly been mentioned that this symptom could be esophageal motility disorder. I think we should be talking of achalasia, which will have long-standing history, variation with temperature, regurgitation, recurrent chest infections, and so on. Weight loss can occur in achalasia. It's part of the Eckardt scoring and severity, but chest pain would be less common. If you have chest pain, then the weight loss and all that may not be there. So I think for esophageal motility disorders, please be specific which conditions you have in mind, rather than generically referring to them as one possibility.
Okay, sir.
Okay, Bhuvnesh?
Yes, sir.
Carry on.
So patient is tobacco chewer, sir, since last.
Go to the next slide. Let's move on. So based on this history, what is your impression?
So based on this history, my impression is patient is having dysphagia due to malignant reason. Esophageal carcinoma is my first provisional diagnosis, sir. Carcinoma esophagus. And my second diagnosis could be, sir, gastroesophageal junction carcinomas.
Yeah, so when you have a painless progressive dysphagia, it could be esophagus or esophagogastric junction.
Yes.
Could it be benign?
So with such short history and significant weight loss and loss of anorexia, sir, it is less likely to be benign, sir.
Less likely or unlikely to be benign? Okay. Okay, carry on.
Examination, sir. Patient is conscious, cooperative to time, place, and person. His weight is 64 kg. Height is 174 centimeter. BMI is 21.13 kilogram per meter square. He is moderately built and nourished, sir. His echo performance status is 1, sir. Pulse is 76 per minute. Blood pressure 108 by 60 millimeter of mercury. Respiratory rate is 18 per minute. There is pallor present in conjunctiva. No icterus, pedal edema, cyanosis, and lymphadenopathy. No supraclavicular or axillary lymphadenopathy is noted, sir. On oral cavity examination, hygiene was good, sir. Hydration status was good. teeth, buccal mucosa, gingival sulcus, tongue, facial pillar, pharyngeal wall is normal. On per abdomen examination, so in inspection, abdomen is scaphoid, no scar, sinus, visible peristalsis, fullness is there. On palpation, abdomen is soft and non-tender, no palpable lump. All quadrants of abdomen moves equal with respiration, no organomegaly. On percussion, no abnormal sound heard on percussion. And hernial orifices are normal, back and spine are normal, and no tenderness is noted, sir. On per rectal examination, anal orifice is normal anal tone, no tenderness, finger is stained with fecal matter, no palpable Blummer shells, sir. On respiratory examination, chest is normal, sir. Trachea centrally located, no scar sinus noted. Normal bilateral respiratory movement is noted, sir. No abnormal respiratory sounds.
What were you expecting to find in the examination in this patient?
Sir, as this seems a case of esophageal carcinoma, sir. Until disease is advanced, sir, there are very few clinical positive findings I could appreciate, sir, in such patients, sir.
Yeah, so you should say that clinical examination in a patient with malignant dysphagia. We have still not made a diagnosis of esophageal carcinoma. You should
Yes.
say malignant dysphagia can be normal. There may be no abnormalities found, but what all can be present, theoretically speaking, what all can be there?
Sir, as it is a malignant dysphagia, there could be some tylosis of palms and sole is could present there, sir. Then there could be
Is that the commonest finding? How many patients you have seen with tylosis?
No, sir, I haven't seen any.
So why talk of unusual or rare things? What are the common findings? A patient who walks into your clinic supported by two sons, what would you find in a patient with malignant dysphagia? You will find features of malnutrition. You will find fetal edema. You will find pallor. So say about those things first, isn't it?
Yes.
So features of malnutrition, features of vitamin deficiency, fetal edema, pallor. You can have enlarged lymph nodes on general examination. They are more common than tylosis. Tylosis is a theoretical knowledge. Practically, I don't know how many of us have seen tylosis. What in the abdomen can be there in a patient with malignant dysphagia?
In malignant dysphagia, sir, due to weight loss, abdomen could be scaphoid, sir. There could be enlarged celiac nodes, sir. It could be palpable as a lump. If there is a liver metastasis is there, sir, then there it could be palpable, sir. If it is gross metastasis in liver is there, sir, it could be palpable. Then, sir, ascites could also be examined, sir. Noted.
Anything else? Suppose it is GE junction, because we said that painless progressive dysphagia, not necessarily CA esophagus, it could be adenocarcinoma of the esophagogastric junction.
Yes, sir.
So in a thin-built patient, the palpable celiac lymph node is not the commonest finding. The commonest finding could be either enlarged nodular liver, ascites. Then you should say a large growth at the esophagogastric junction may be palpable in a thin-built cachectic patient who has weak abdominal muscles. Yes, you are right. Enlarged celiac nodes rarely may be palpable. Large omental deposit may be palpable. On per rectal examination, you may find melena. The stool may be melinatous. So you have to think of all possibilities. Now, this is a theoretical question I am asking you. I'm not asking you what is there in this patient that you have already described. So you should know what all is possible to be there in a patient like this. Okay?
Yes.
Carry on. Other faculty members, anybody would like to make any comment, ask him any question? Please chip in. Okay, carry on.
So should I go with investigation, sir?
And in the chest also, what are the common findings you expect in a patient who has dysphagia?
So trachea could be displaced, sir.
Why?
Hello.
Why trachea would be displaced?
Yes, sir. Then, sir,
No. You said trachea will be displaced, right? How trachea is displaced in CA esophagus? You read that CA esophagus can displace the trachea? Common findings in chest are because of regurgitation and aspiration. It means that there will be pneumonitis,
pneumonitis, sir.
it means crepitations in the chest, or bronchospasm because of recurrent aspiration. Or you could have malignant pleural effusion, which will give rise to dull note at the bases and decreased breath sound. That is what you should describe. In fact, in patients with dysphagia, you may have findings in the chest, not in the abdomen. So examination and description of the chest should also be more elaborate than what you would do in any other case.
Yes, sir.
Okay, carry on.
So I would further like to investigate this patient, sir.
What would you like to do?
So I would like to do 2 sets of investigations, sir. One to reach up to diagnosis, and another one to see the normal status of the patient, sir. General status of the patient, sir. So, sir, first of all, I would like to go for the CBC, sir. CBC and blood investigations in this patient, sir.
So which set of investigations is more important?
To reach a diagnosis.
So what would you like to do for that?
For that, sir, first of all, I would like to do a upper GI endoscopy, sir, in this patient.
We have the endoscopy?
Yes, sir.
You want to do only endoscopy?
Endoscopy with biopsy, sir.
Always, whenever you are doing an endoscopy, always, except barring exceptions, you should say endoscopy and biopsy. Yes.
Okay, sir. So endoscopy suggestive of ulceroproliferative growth at 20 centimeter in esophagus, scope not passed beyond, sir, and multiple biopsies taken, sir.
What do you make out of this endoscopy report?
So with this endoscopy, it is suggestive of that growth is at cervico upper thoracic junction, sir. Upper thoracic esophagus involvement is there, sir. Tumor mostly located.
Any other interpretation?
And sir, patient is having absolute dysphagia because scope is not negotiated beyond the growth, sir.
Yeah, so that we knew from the history that patient is having grade 4 dysphagia. What here it is that it is involving most part of the circumference and is causing significant narrowing.
Yes.
Okay. What does the biopsy show?
Biopsy shows a squamous cell carcinoma poorly differentiated, sir.
Suppose the biopsy was negative, inconclusive.
Sir, I'll do the repeat biopsy, sir.
Again negative. Why biopsies are negative? When you are seeing an obvious growth, why should the biopsy be negative?
Because, sir, it is a possibility that we are taking biopsy from the necrotic area, sir.
So where should the biopsy be taken from?
Sir,
if you are doing the endoscopy,
biopsy should be taken from the tumor, sir. 6 to 8. Sorry, sir.
The first biopsy report was negative. Now you are doing the endoscopy. So what precautions or what extra steps you would take while taking the biopsies? Where do you take the biopsy from?
So I'll take 6 to 8 biopsies from the site where tumor is most prominent, sir.
Is it most prominent or is it something else? From the edge of the tumor where the normal mucosa is joining the tumor. Most prominent part in a intraluminal growth may be the center, which may be necrotic.
Okay, sir.
So 6 to 8 biopsies from different quadrants, if possible, as far as you can see, and from the edges rather than from the central necrotic part of the tumor. Any other technique to make sure that the second biopsy is positive because first was negative?
So narrow band imaging, sir.
No,
Or
on routine endoscopy, any other technique of taking a biopsy to make sure that it comes positive, especially when one biopsy has been negative? What is a deep biopsy? Dr. Saraswat, would you like to explain to him the different techniques
Yeah.
that we do?
I'll do that, but I think I have a very unstable connection today. So one is called the well technique. From the same site, you take biopsies at deeper and deeper layers, and you can get tissue which is submucosal. The other thing would be you need to choose a proper biopsy forceps. If your standard forceps is not working, then a forceps with a spike or a forceps with a large cup will give you more tissue. Often the tumor may be quite gritty and hard, and so the standard biopsy cup simply slip off without giving you a good bite, only scrape rather than take a bite of tissue. So such biopsy forceps may help. And finally, I think you can also dilate the stricture and go within the stricture and take a biopsy. Here you are not able to cross, so you're taking it from the face of the stricture, and where the tumor you are getting a negative thing. So a more representative area may be sampled from within the stricture. And very tight strictures, I think the brush cytology may at times be added to a biopsy, but generally biopsies are more rewarding. Yeah, so that's the few things you can do.
Okay, what next?
So next, I would like to send this patient for imaging, sir. Contrast imaging, sir. Contrast CT thorax and abdomen with pelvis, sir. Neck, thorax, abdomen, and pelvis, sir.
So first you said imaging, then you said contrast imaging, then you came to CT. Why this confusion? Imaging doesn't mean anything. Imaging could be ultrasound, imaging could be isotope scintigraphy also. Your first answer should be a specific answer. You should have said, I would like to do a contrast enhanced CT of the neck, chest, abdomen, and whatever. So why neck?
Because
Before that, before that, you want to do an ultrasound before going for CT?
yes, sir, an ultrasound abdomen with chest X-ray, sir. I would I would like to do.
Many examiners may interrupt you at this stage and would ask you, well, would you not like to do simple investigations like chest X-ray and ultrasound? You may argue against saying that squamous cell carcinoma doesn't usually metastasize to liver or to the peritoneum. But I think to be safe, there is no harm in all malignancies to begin with to say that I would like to do a chest X-ray and an ultrasound of the abdomen, because they are relatively inexpensive investigations. And if they show anything positive, then probably there will be no need to do any further expensive investigations. It becomes very important if you are dealing with an esophagogastric junction growth, because they are more likely to metastasize to the liver and peritoneum. But even in squamous cell carcinoma, I think it is better to play safe and say a chest X-ray and an ultrasound first. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you said CT including neck. Why neck?
So because esophageal carcinoma, first of all, sir, in this patient, upper GI endoscopy is telling that growth is at 20 centimeters. So neck is also involved, sir. Secondly, sir, in esophageal carcinoma, there is cervical lymph node enlargement is involvement is there, sir. So in esophagus, neck is also mandatory to include in CT.
Yeah, so that is the main reason, neck lymph nodes. And that is why some people, when they are doing an ultrasound abdomen, they would probably add an ultrasound of the neck also, because ultrasound can pick up enlarged lymph nodes in the neck. And it is a routine practice in some units to have an ultrasound of the neck also. Okay, so neck, chest, and abdomen. Why pelvis?
So if there is a metastasis in pelvis, is there any ascites in pelvis is there? So it could be noted in CT, which is not appreciable in digital rectal examination. So
Yeah, so again, that is more important if you are dealing with an esophagogastric junction adenocarcinoma rather than a squamous cell carcinoma of the upper thoracic esophagus. But I would say no harm. But it would definitely be neck, chest, and abdomen.
yes.
We have the films.
So we have videos, small
Yes.
video.
Okay. Let's see. Keep describing as you show us.
So, so this is a axial cut of contrast enhanced CT, including neck, thorax, and abdomen, sir. So this is a tumor. There is a circumferential growth, sir, in esophagus, noted, sir.
How do you
So,
describe esophagus on CT scan? It's not enough to say, if an MBBS student says that it is fine, that there is a circumferential growth in the esophagus. I expect more from you. Which part of the esophagus?
so this is infracarinal part of esophagus, sir.
Yeah, so on CT scan, you always describe the esophagus in relation to the carina.
Yes,
Whether
sir.
you say cervical, or in thorax, you say supracarinal or intracarinal, or you say whether it is the intra-abdominal esophagus or G junction. So you should be able to tell where the growth is. So where is it starting? Which is important, upper end or lower end?
Sir, upper end, sir.
So you have to show us where the growth is starting.
So this is a circumferential growth, sir.
How do you know it is starting here and not above this?
So
Unless you see the normal esophagus and then the transition to thickening, you cannot say where it is starting. So that part probably is not included. Is the neck included in this?
sir, neck is included in.
Start from the neck. Then only you will be able to say where the growth is starting. Because
Sir,
if you say infracarinal, doesn't fit in with your endoscopy findings?
here, sir.
Yes?
No, sir. Intracarinal. Yes, sir.
It doesn't. 20 centimeter is not infracarinal. What is the level of carina?
So 24 centimeters.
Yeah, 25 centimeter in a normal built person, around 25 centimeter. So 20
Yes, sir.
centimeter according to endoscopy should be supracarinal.
Yes, sir.
Yes, start from here.
Sir, esophagus is filled with food particles, sir. Noted, sir. Then,
So it is dilated. It is dilated
yes,
and filled with food residue.
yes, sir. Food residue. And sir, this is the carina, sir. This is the carina. And
use your cursor to point out things. What exactly are you referring to? Use your cursor on the computer.
Just freeze on the cut where the carina is there. Where is the carina? What is carina?
sorry, sir.
Carina is the tracheal bifurcation. So you should, in that frozen section, you should be able to see the trachea, and then it should be divided into the two bronchi.
So, Sorry, sir, my laptop got hanged. Yes.
Okay, so while he's trying to come back, see, unless you see the normal esophagus or the dilated esophagus with as we saw here, and then the transition to either thickening or the growth, that is the level where you would say that the tumor is starting. And on endoscopy, it was seen to be starting at 20 centimeter, which on CT scan should be above the carina. If there is a discrepancy, then most probably the endoscopic impression is not correct, because CT is a more objective investigation, which all of us can see and agree upon. And I think in between, Govind had a question that should we not say blood investigations first as the patient is pale on general examination? Yes, you may say that, but unless the patient is in such poor nutritional state that you think he is not fit enough to undergo any treatment where the establishment of diagnosis would not be important. But otherwise, for any treatment, whether it is surgical or non-surgical, you will have to establish the diagnosis first and then see whether the patient is fit for that treatment or not. So by and large, that is the approach. But I know that some examiners, if you say straight away endoscopy, some examiners may interrupt you and ask you, would you not do blood investigations first? So as I again and again say, this was a more diplomatic approach, that you say that I would like to do 2 sets of investigation. One, to establish a diagnosis and to stage the disease. And second, for general workup and evaluation of the patient to see his fitness for whatever treatment I am planning. And some of these investigations would probably be done simultaneously. So while he's loading it, any volunteer or student who would say, why endoscopy, why not barium here?
Is my screen visible, sir?
Not yet.
Okay, sir.
Share. Have you shared it?
1 second, sir.
Yes, any student would like to answer that? Yes, now we can see. Yes. So show us the transition.
This was the carina, sir. Here.
Little higher. Here
Yes,
you
yes.
see right
Yes.
and left bronchus separate. This is the carina.
Yes,
See
sir.
the bifurcation. So this is the carina. Now at the level of carina, what do you see as far as the esophagus is concerned?
Sir, esophagus is dilated, sir, and filled with food residue, sir. There could be circumferential thickening of esophagus is there, sir, but it is not properly appreciable, sir, at this.
We are not able to make it out. Maybe on the primary video it may be seen. We are just seeing a dilated esophagus. Okay, go down slowly.
So this was a carina, sir. We are going down, sir, and
here you definitely see a thickened wall,
yes,
circumferential thickening of the wall of the esophagus. So there is obviously a discrepancy between the endoscopy and the CT scan, unless in the CT above the carina, in the dilated esophagus, there is a growth, intraluminal polypoidal growth, which is projecting into the lumen, which at least we could not appreciate on the video.
so this is the plain video, sir. In contrast video is in starting, I guess, sir. And in this so in this contrast enhanced video, we can appreciate, sir, thickening, but it is infracarinal, sir.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, that whatever we have seen so far, it seems that the esophageal wall is thickened circumferentially, but in the infracarinal part. The part at the level of carina and above the carina is the dilated esophagus, which is filled with food residue, which doesn't corroborate with the endoscopy findings. What is the formal report? What else would you like to show us on the CT? Go to the area where there is maximum thickening of the esophageal wall. What else you have to see in a patient?
Posteriorly, pericardium is involved, sir. I feel so. Like, sir, here, sir.
Is pericardium the most important thing?
No, sir. Aorta, sir.
So talk of the important things first. Which are the 3 important structures in CA esophagus which you would like to show us? What makes it 4B? P4B.
Aorta, trachea, trachea and tracheobronchial tree, and vertebra.
Yeah, so show us that first. Show the relationship to these structures first.
So in this,
how do you describe the relationship of the growth to the aorta?
with the Picus angle, sir.
Before that,
Fed planes are preserved.
See whether there is a fat plane. If there is a fat plane, then you don't talk of the Picus angle. That means that they are free. But you have to remember that in patients with malignant dysphagia, because of weight loss, there may be no body fat. Like here, you see there is no subcutaneous fat or very little subcutaneous fat. So intervisceral fat also will be less. If fat plane is seen, it is good. If it is not seen, it doesn't mean that there is involvement. Then you talk of the angle of contact. So show us this cut where there is maximum angle of contact between the esophagus and the aorta here.
So this is the maximum contact.
Go one step down. Yes, see this?
Yes, sir.
This is where you don't see any fat and the angle of contact is
Almost 90 degrees, sir.
90 degree, which means
involvement, aortic involvement is there, sir.
90 degree means involvement?
In more than 60% of patients, sir. If Picus angle is greater than 90, sir.
I'm not sure. Any other faculty member would like to say whether he is correct, that if 90 degree is the angle of contact, then it is 60% chance that it will be involved? Check on that. I am not sure. I thought 90 to 180, more than 90 degree, yes, you say suspicious involvement. Okay.
So probably, sir, up to 180 degrees, sir. 90, more than 90 degree. No.
Yeah. Okay. What else? What else do you see on the CT? Show the pericardium. You were saying pericardium is involved. Is the tracheobronchial tree involved?
So here, sir.
Yeah. Go above, go into the trachea. What do you see here? Yes.
Yeah.
Is this the normal shape of trachea?
No, sir.
So the shape is altered.
Yes, sir.
It is a compression because of the dilated esophagus. Similarly, when you go a little down, you see normally it should be rounded, but here there is, yeah.
Scaphoid.
Yes. So this is compression.
Yes, sir.
Which bronchus, suppose the growth is subcarinal or infracarinal, which bronchus is more likely to be involved?
Right bronchus, sir?
No, left. Go down, left bronchus. It is the left bronchus which runs longer in contact with the esophagus. Here, of course, you can see the proximity to right also. But if one bronchus is to be involved, it is more likely to be left bronchus. So it is not enough to say that the carina or the trachea is free. You have to talk of both bronchi, more so the left bronchus. And then you have to talk of the involvement of the vertebrae. So these 3 tissues, tracheobronchial tree, aorta, and vertebra, are important. The other 3 soft tissues, that is pericardium, pleura, and crus of the diaphragm or diaphragm, are less important because they are resectable structures. They don't make it unresectable. Okay.
Yes.
I think we have only a few minutes left. So any other faculty member would like to
excuse me, sir.
Yes, go
Am
ahead.
I audible? I'm Dr. Sahil. Actually, he said in endoscopy, the growth is at 20 centimeter in esophagus. I think that is creating a confusion. He's not said from the incisors.
Yeah, but on endoscopy, an endoscopist, when he or she reports a growth, he should always talk
The-
of distance from incisors. If somebody has said 20
Maybe
centimeter in esophagus,
he-
that's not correct.
Maybe he has written wrong from the esophagus. That may explain the discrepancy between the CT and the endoscopy findings.
Maybe. Because standard description has to be from incisors on endoscopy.
Yes, sir.
There are one or two more comments. Barium is not routinely used. Yes, Govind, you are right. When you suspect mechanical dysphagia, then the investigation of choice is endoscopy. If based on history you suspect motility disorder, then it may be barium rather than endoscopy. And if stricture precludes endoscopy, upper GI barium studies may help to demarcate distal end. Not really an important issue, because anyway you will do a CT scan which will tell you the distal end, and distal end is usually not important unless it is a esophagogastric junction growth where you would like to classify the tumor as Sievert 1, 2 or 3. So distal end, for that reason, I don't think today anybody would do a barium study. Anybody else? Any other faculty member? Any student would like to ask anything? I think what we should do, that since we have not been able to cover the management, we could have a session separate on management of CA esophagus. So maybe the next student who is on the list can prepare the management, including the operative part of esophagus. So that would complete the story.
Sir, in case of dysphagia, when we are presenting history, we should tell regarding any neuromuscular discoordination. That means, is there any difficulty in act of initial dysphagia? So it will rule out any neuromuscular or oropharyngeal dysphagia.
Yes. So a little more detailed description of the process of swallowing, where the problem is. Yes. Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments, can we close?
Sorry, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Saraswat. Thank you, Avinash, for arranging. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.